Hello, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Perspectives. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. Well, we talk a lot on Being Patient about breaking down the stigma of Alzheimer's disease, especially in populations of color, where you might have a harder time discussing things with the brain. I know, being half Chinese, it's certainly present in Asian culture. Well, today I'm really happy to have joining us Ralph and Mollie Richards. They are Alzheimer's advocates who really have made it a mission to go out and speak about Alzheimer's disease to break down some of those barriers. So Ralph and Mollie, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
We're happy to be here.
Daryl, let me mention also that we are affiliated with the Alzheimer's Association, but also Indiana University School of Medicine in the research part of it. That's
Right.
what you're.
So they're wearing two hats here. They do
right.
advocacy, yes, for the association as well as for research,
Yes.
and we're gonna delve into that as well because that's a very important topic. Ralph, tell me a little bit about your family history with Alzheimer's.
Very interesting because I knew very little about Alzheimer's. My mom passed away when I was 19 years old, and my dad remarried at a later point in life, and he married a lady that developed Alzheimer's. He would do everything for her. He would feed her, bathe her. No one could come in and do anything as well as what he could do. At night, he would sleep in the bed with her, and he put his arms around her, so if she would move or get up, he would never recognize that. But one Saturday morning, he got up to go outside to see his most cherished and loved flowers, his garden. She was still asleep. And when he came back in, of course, the house was quiet, and he called out to her. He didn't hear anything. And he called again, and he heard nothing, but he noticed that the basement door was open, and he went to the basement door as she had fallen down the steps. I tell you, we tried to work with my father at long distance so many times, trying to get him to understand he can't do this by himself. He must work with someone. When we actually relocated him, he was near death. He probably, if she would have lived longer, he would have preceded her in death. So after seeing that, I became part of the board of directors of the Alzheimer's Association in New York. And that's where I began to learn more. And that's how our journey started some 25 years ago.
Wow. And, that is such a common thing we hear is accepting that you need help, right? And in fact, more caregivers die before people living with Alzheimer's. And so the stress alone is a big factor.
Yes.
So Mollie, tell us, okay, you two are husband-wife couple. When did you first begin your journey into the Alzheimer's world?
Well, it first began, and I didn't know what it was. When I was 17 years old, my father came home from work and said that he had been let go because he could no longer remember what to do. I was 17. I was getting ready to go off to college, and it was a tough decision because all the neighbors were saying, well, you shouldn't go, you should stay home. But my mother said, I want you to go. And so, and I didn't know what kind of memory impairment it was because it was like a long time ago. And then I went for a year and came back home because we really couldn't afford for me to continue to go because my mother had to take out a loan. And this is a big financial piece that people don't realize. She had to take out a loan for that first year. And I was like, no, you can't do that again. I will stay home. I will work full-time. I will go to school part-time. I will pay back that loan and move on, which I eventually did. I eventually graduated and did all that stuff. But what's kind of interesting, Deborah, is because I was away at college, I didn't realize, and then even though I was only away that 1 year, and I came back and lived at home the last 3 years, then I graduated and went away. So I didn't realize the full impact that it had on my 9-year-old brother. Until a couple of years ago, I was talking to him and he was saying how hard it was because My father would leave home and get lost, have a seizure, and somebody would bring him back home. Sometimes he had seizures at home, and my brother would have to help my mom manage him during the seizures. And he talked about how horrible it was for her afterwards. And I never knew that. So it had a bad impact on her, but it also had a bad impact on him as a child. And I
And
think
at
people
9 years
often
old,
forget the child.
yeah, and at 9 years old, it would be very traumatic to see a
Yes,
seizure.
yes. And
Yeah.
even as he grew into, his teenage years and everything, it was still very, very traumatic for him.
So, both of you have had, your journey, you said, Ralph, began 25 years ago. So how is it that, I mean, I can't tell you how many people have told me, but in the past, you have to meet Ralph and Mollie. You're known around a lot of Alzheimer's circles as doing such great work. It seems like now you spend a lot of time, you both dedicate a lot of time to this cause.
Yeah.
Tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about coming to that decision. Was this like something that it happened through personal experience and you were already on this track anyway? Or did you, as a couple, sit down and say, we really want to dedicate more time to this?
I'll let Mollie start because it started with her and then I joined her.
Right. Because as an occupational therapist, I retired about 9 years ago. So 30 years before that, I began working in long-term care and as a director of rehabilitation programs. And I began to learn about Alzheimer's disease and its impact. And on my last job, I worked there for 19 years. The last 3 years of that, I was a memory care service line manager. So that meant I was responsible for the education of 1,000 employees. And I had a team of 16 people. But that was kind of interesting for me. And I think I was really fortunate while I was in New York. While we lived in New York, I was appointed by the governor of the state of New York to, it's called the Coordinating Council for Alzheimer's and Other Dementias. And so I got to work on that, and that helped me. That was focused on people, caregivers living in the community. We were trying to get the governor to understand the needs of people living in the community so that money could be raised to help support them. So that opened my eyes even wider. So I think I was really blessed. I had a lot of different opportunities to, learn about it. And I was on the board of directors at the Rochester Alzheimer's Association, also became vice chairman of the board. And so it was all around me. And then as the years have gone by, I've discovered, and we can explore this a little bit later, so many of my family members have Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and if I could take up of where we started with you, Mollie, I retired early by choice from a photographic company in Rochester, New York, and
No, you're being very modest. You had a big job at Kodak.
that's it. Kodak. I worked my way through 31 years from an account manager to vice president in Washington, D.C. But nonetheless, I wanted to do something different. And one of the things I did was I went back to school and studied magnetic resonance, MRI. And in an MRI, we would image the brain, people with Alzheimer's, and we would follow them over a period of years and then see how it actually, the disease destroyed the brain. And Mollie and I became community educators for the Alzheimer's Association. And you should have seen it, Deborah. When we first started, we read the script. We didn't have to remember. We read it. Of course,
Word for word.
If we don't do that today, and I just tell people, when you want to volunteer, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to do it. So I think that's really interesting. So anyway, that's how we got started, and we started advancing from there.
He is being modest because we did. Tell about the grant that we got to start in Rochester.
Yeah. That was really interesting. I didn't know how far we wanted to go, but nonetheless, you did true. We were a part of the faith-based area where in the churches, when I say faith-based, and we work with the Alzheimer's Association. We had the first Alzheimer's office in the church, where
Wow.
people from around the city would call us, ask us questions, and we hope to been able to be face to face with them. But that business model didn't work. So we knew we had to change the business model. So we went from the office being in the church, then we would go out to each church and we do presentations and answer a lot of questions. And boy, did we learn a lot. People would evade us, they would avoid us. You say anything about Alzheimer's, and oh, they didn't want anything. No, they didn't want anything to do with that. We've come a long way today to where it was when we started 20 some years ago.
Tell us a little bit about that from the perspective of both your own families and what you were experiencing in those early days.
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, a bad word, or just don't even go there type reaction?
Well, it's really interesting. It's a stigma, and really when you stop and think about what the word stigma is, it can be defined as a mark of disgrace that individual may have associated with a particular circumstances or a particular person. And people did not associate it with when we associate with Alzheimer's. I remember when we would come up, Uncle Joe would be in the back room and he had senility, he was senile, and nobody wanted him to come forward because they didn't want to be embarrassed, by him. So for the most part, African Americans are a very private group of people, and it's essentially we take care of our own, so we will not expose things out into the community.
Right. And when it came to be too much for my mother to care for my father, because she was quite a few years younger than him and she had to work full time. And it was time for him to go into long-term care because of the wandering and passing out in the street and having to be brought home. And this is where families sometimes are not supportive. And so when she said she had to put him, in a long-term care facility, many of her relatives were saying, no, you shouldn't do that. You should stay home and take care of him. How dare you? This is horrible that you would do this. And of course, I supported my mother. I told her she was doing what she needed to do, regardless of what they were saying. He was not safe, leaving the stove on, wandering in the streets. And then she was working? No. So she went ahead and placed him. And, me being someone that's worked in long-term care for a long time, if you can find a good long-term care facility, my last one was just excellent. It's a good place for people with memory impairment. If it's a good memory care place.
I 100% agree. My father, who isn't diagnosed with Alzheimer's, broke his hip, and we put my mom, because he had to be in rehab, in a place for 3 months. And my sister and I actually said we were so scared to do that. It was just like scary, right? And then once we did, we were like, this is going to sound really weird, but it almost feels like she's better, because she was so socially engaged.
Right.
Loved it, and so we got that taste. And what it means is that, if we do have to come to that decision one day, we're not scared anymore. She was actually really happy, and it's true. I think what you say, Mollie, is finding the right place is
correct
to that, right?
We've had people that would call us personally. They were very prominent people in the city, but they didn't want anyone to know that it was Alzheimer's in their family, or they suspected they may have. And we would either meet them at their home or they would come to our home. We even met with people in the garage once, because when their loved ones had Alzheimer's. But nonetheless, it's amazing the things that we had to do because people knew very little about the disease.
Wait, I want to dig a little bit into that, because if you're very private and you keep it within your own family, is it that they are kind of saying, oh, it's just he or she is senile? Is that the approach, and there's nothing we can do, therefore we're just gonna hide this? What were some of those initial conversations like, and how do you, Mollie and Ralph, convince people differently? Like when you're going to talk to people, what exactly do you say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is part of it. Part of it is the unknown and the reputations that nursing homes used to have in the past. And some of it's financial,
Mhm.
because I've run into it not just with African American cultures, with other cultures, that they want to keep the person home because they can keep that Social Security check coming in and whatever income it is. And because they can't afford for that person not to be there. But finding the right place is such a key to it, and understanding that there's activities. I'm an OT, I'm an occupational therapist, but I think activities are the key. I think they're just the king of the castle in long-term care for people that are not receiving rehab, because they're the ones that give them the activities, they stimulate their brain. I worked with speech and language pathologists back in Virginia, and we worked with a group of long-term care residents who could not participate in therapy because they could not follow directions. We worked with them twice a week, 45 minutes each time, and we did very basic things. They got better. 2 45-minute treatments a week. They improved. Even the nursing staff realized it because they were able to feed themselves and do other things. Physical therapy realized it because they could follow the directions better. It's just, you've just got to keep that mind active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've learned too is the creative brain still tends to flourish, right?
Yeah.
Painting and art and dance, that still flourishes, and that doesn't seem to be as impacted as the hippocampus memory
Yeah.
in Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
other half, the other part of that is they do nothing, it will actually die. The brain will die. But the interesting part we found is that when we talk to people, it wouldn't take us very long to see they must have some type of neurodegenerative disease. For an example, we would go to business meetings in our church, and some people become so irate, so argumentative, and we didn't realize till later that that was a sign that they're running into some difficulty from a dementia standpoint. Now, I'm not giving it a disease. I'm just saying dementia.
Yep.
They'll use expletives, which is unlike them, to do that. But nonetheless, it's just amazing how they would ask questions, and we would answer the question, and they'll ask us the same question a few minutes later. I said, oh, something is wrong. How do we talk to them, or how do we talk to their loved one to let them know what's going on, or what we perceive that's going on?
So how do you have that conversation? I mean, you're kind of treading a delicate area. You're not a doctor, right? And so how do you have that conversation?
Well, it's really interesting because we had a very good friend that used to visit us every year around Thanksgiving and would have dinner with us. And he would be really very intentional to what he wanted to say, but he just had to pause a lot because he was finding words. He couldn't find the words to complete the sentence or make the point. And each year he would get worse. His wife never knew this. And Mollie and I talked about it after they left. And I said, we need to talk to his wife and at least let her know what we have observed, and he to seek help. She did take him in, and he was diagnosed, and he may have had Lewy body dementia, so it's amazing what we see and what we hear. I mean, people repetitive over and over and over again.
And it has been interesting that some people are open to that conversation, because we had another friend that came to visit and stayed with us for 3 or 4 days. And when we took her back to the airport, I said, we've got to call her husband because something's not right. And we called and talked to him, frankly, and he accepted it and had her tested. And she does have Lewy body dementia. And so sometimes it's just easy just to talk to people. And but sometimes people won't listen. And part of it is they say, well, and this is changing now, but they would say, well, what's the point? What can be done about it? And now, the medications, the pills that they've been taking over the years are still going to be appropriate for people in the late stages. but we're trying to track people in the early stage. And that's going to be challenging because that's when they don't really identify that they have a problem, but that's
Yeah.
when they can be best helped.
Yeah, and as we know, research is now turning mostly towards prevention, not reversal,
Yes.
right? We know it's almost impossible to reverse neurodegeneration, but not
Right.
prevent, right? So
Right.
let's talk a little bit about the research part of this, because we know that African Americans are more predisposed to Alzheimer's, like other diverse communities, Latino as well. So tell me a little bit, because I know part of your mission is to have more people of color in research so that science can look under that lens to understand. I mean, we all have different, we're all wired differently. We have different DNA. Looking through the lens of specific diverse populations is so important for this disease. So tell us a little bit about that conversation as well. What are you doing and how are you doing it in order to make people more aware of research and actually want to participate?
Well, I'm being totally transparent because my father had a form of dementia, which we don't know what it was. I get tested every year. And
you get cognitive testing, like what?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first year they did an MRI of my brain and they did all that. And so now they just do the cognitive testing, the blood work, the heart, all the physical things. And I tell people that. And I say I go once a year and I get tested, and it because I'm over 65, it doesn't cost me anything. It's painless. It's non-invasive except for the blood draw, and I'm okay. And they send me a report each year, and it says that you're okay, for your age, you're doing fine. And when I tell people that at the end of a presentation, they'll say, okay, they'll raise their hand and say, well, how can I get signed up for that? That has helped tremendously,
A
just
good
being
segue, right?
totally transparent.
Right, right. That's an excellent transition. When we look at 6 million people in the United States with Alzheimer's, 2/3 of them are women, which tells us that there's something either hormonal or something is the reason why women, and a lot of work is being done trying to determine that. And 1/3 of the women, daughters, are caring for the ones with Alzheimer's. So there's a double whammy there that they're experiencing. So I think that's a real key as we begin to look and to figure out something about what's going on here. And we understand that risk factors, when we look at risk factors, age is the biggest one, being female is one, diabetes. But here's one among others that's just beginning to surface. It's called post-traumatic slave disorder. Now, if you understand what I'm saying here, because I've been in sales for many years, and we would take much time to sell a product to someone and they would buy it. I mean, hundreds of thousands worth of dollars. So what has happened to the slave over the years has essentially been the same thing. Separated the family, giving them poor choices of food. They would get sick, degrading them. They've changed the DNA of the slave. So therefore, I believe that's one of the reasons why African Americans are twice as likely to have, one of the reasons why twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's than whites. Because in fact, among other things, but post-traumatic slave disorder has to be calculated in there too.
But a big positive part right now, Deborah, okay, we started working in research with IU in 2016. That's when we first joined, because we moved here like the very end of 2014. And so we've increased the number of minority recruitment from 3 to 5% to over 21%.
Wow.
So, through the efforts that we're doing and reaching out to the community, and, a big change is it's kind of easy to see. When we first started, we were at a health fair and we had the Alzheimer's tablecloth on, and people would just like run away. They would just They were like, "Ooh, no, no, no," like they were going to catch it from the tablecloth. But now people will stop at our booth and ask us questions, and sometimes will sign up for research right then. Another thing that we're doing that's, I think, is forward moving is that research has shown that children who aren't read to at an early age and continuous will have an increase of 8% of developing memory loss when they get older. And so now we give away free books to children to try to encourage them to read so we can get them in that habit, because books are very expensive.
Yeah.
And so we get donations and everything, and we buy new books, and we let the children choose the books that they want. We want to get them started in reading to build up that cognitive reserve, to get their minds working and not so much in the screens.
Yeah.
That's actually a amazing strategy, and great, to get, because then you're getting the family to think about brain health before there's a problem. So do you think framing the conversation around prevention, or are people who you're seeing who are more willing to participate are ones because they have a family member, or maybe they're worried about their memory?
Yeah, let me just say this, and Mollie and I are not the Lone Rangers. We're not doing this by ourselves. We have a community advisory board that we put together, and we formulated one when we were in New York, and we have one here. And the purpose of this is a diverse group of people of different professions. And what we do is train them, educate them about Alzheimer's and how to prospect people, recruit people, become part of the study. And we do that through, and listen very closely, education. Education is a very vital. In the Old Testament, there's a passage of scripture in Hosea 4:6 that says, "For my people perish through lack of knowledge." And so therefore, that rung a bell for us and said, here's our key, is that we give them knowledge first. We give them something, and then in return, we can ask something of them. And that's how we ask them to become part of studies.
So,
Right.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Mollie.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, and as far as, the population that we're working with, it was kind of interesting. I was talking to my sister-in-law the other day, and she had a couple people that she wanted us to connect with. And this happens all the time now. My kids, the different people will call and say, so-and-so is having a problem with their mother. They think they have Alzheimer's. Can you talk to them? And I was, in talking to her, she was saying that people now, and this is what you're doing is so good, will look at a video. They will go online. She said people in their 40s and 50s are going to go online and seek out information because that's just been what they grew up with. Whereas people in their 70s and 80s are less likely to go to the internet. So what you're doing and what you're posting is something that young people are going to look at. So we're going to be, and we want to target these people that are in their 40s and 50s because the questions they're asking, what direction do I go? I think my mom or my dad is losing their memory and I want to help them. What do I do next? And so I hadn't really thought about it that way, being an older person, but she said, yeah, this is the way young people like to receive information.
Honestly, there's not a week that goes by where someone, a friend or a friend of a friend, contacts me and says, oh, I'm starting to worry, because it is so prevalent. And I'm glad you bring up that point about education, because when we launched Being Patient, one of the things that struck me was the amount of comments we get from people who are willing to participate in research because we're explaining what the research is doing, right? In a language they can understand. So an unintended consequence is people are putting their hands up like, oh, how do I find out more about this study? I think my loved one, and I was like, it's not that difficult if you take the time and the energy to educate people. You see what the result can be. And I love how you're reinforcing exactly what we believe, which is education. It has to start with education. You can't expect people to do
it's amazing. People can make education and intellectual decisions, but we also employ things like trust. building trust, understanding cultural competencies. If you're going to go in and talk to some African Americans, make sure the people that's going in and talk is an African American, or else they're not going to listen. And with any culture, I think it's important. So I think respect, as I mentioned, is trust. And also, you ask yourself the question, or they're asking it, do you care about me? Are you here because of research and the grants that you're making, the money, or do you care about me and the community and the people of color? And if you can answer that question, then you have it.
Absolutely. I totally 100% agree with you on that. Okay, just to end with, tell me a little bit about the conversations you have with your own children, given that you both have Alzheimer's on both sides of your family. What does that look like at home?
Well, they're very aware of me being tested. And I think they probably, you know, because they're adults, they probably track my cognition, and in their own minds are spinning around. And I talk about, you know, the importance of staying on top of things, keeping your brain healthy, eating right. You know, we do all the healthy living things that, you know, the exercise and so forth. Mainly right now, they're just bringing people to us that have questions, and they're not having questions themselves, but they are trying to live a healthy lifestyle. Because I have so many cousins. I had two first cousins that died last year. I have one that's living, a first cousin that's living with Alzheimer's right now. And there's others, and those are just the ones that I know about. And so I let them know, I let them be aware that this is something they really need to keep focused on, and that there are resources out there that they can handle. I want Ralph to talk about our latest project.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that, Molly. Thanks a lot. We know we're not going to be here forever. So one of our goals was to either write a book or a manual on how to, and that's what we've done. We're working with a company called MAP. That's an acronym for, and we got finance from the Gates Foundation. They provided videographers in, and we gave them our story as to how to do things. There's a QR code. You click on the QR code. It tells you a little more in depth about Alzheimer's, in depth about us and what we do. So people can actually go online to get this. Now, one of the things we wanted to do is that we didn't want to make this a money-making opportunity. So we put it online so people, whatever they want to take a look at it, they can at no cost. At no cost to them.
So we can post that QR code. If you send it to us, we'll post it in this in the comments section so that people can.
Yeah, what we need to do is post the link, because there's several QR codes throughout the document.
Give us the link, and
Yeah.
I'll have Katie post it so
Right.
that people know where to find it. But thank you so much to both of you, Ralph and Molly. I mean, I mean it. I mean, I know we've interviewed you before, but I've heard so many people say, you got to meet Ralph and Molly wherever I go. So it's lovely to meet you all, albeit on video. I look forward. I'm sure our paths will cross in future. And, you know, thank you for highlighting the work that you're doing, because it is so important.
Okay, well, thank you for having us.
Yes, it's our pleasure.
So if you missed any of this interview, don't forget to go to beingpatient.com, sign up for our newsletter. That's where we let you know about talks like these, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.